Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call it when you try to take advantage of the fact that smell is a powerful memory device by sprinkling like a little note for something you shouldn't forget with delicious spices?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Season, a letter to the future. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your... What's the joke for Super Mario RPG? There's no good joke there, host Madelyn.
I'm your, I don't know, smelly host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week, if I can get Emma to stop performatively rolling her eyes at me, we're talking about Super Mario RPG and, yes, you guessed it, Season, a letter to the future.
I've been doing, I've had access to crosswords, like real physical ones, so I feel like I got that joke because of my crossword experience where they try to pretend it's a different, like they use different meanings for things to trick you. Yeah.
Will Shorts, watch your back. Coming for you. I guess I could have done something with Legend of the Seven Stars. I kind of but like that's not, there's no double meaning to that. Like an idol group, boy band, whatever. We'll save it for the deleted scenes. So let's dive in. Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, was developed by Square, which I think I sort of knew from the Paper Mario episode, but I had forgotten, and published by Nintendo, obviously, in 1996 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the last Mario game for the SNES.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating cultural artifact because, 1996, the pinnacle of Square Nintendo cooperation releases, and then they totally break off relations because Nintendo refuses to change to a disc system, and now Final Fantasy and Square are more Sony aligned now, despite before that entirely being on Nintendo consoles, which is really, it's just very fascinating that, like, they released this right before they're like, okay, Nintendo, we're done with you now.
It really does feel like, if you don't know that history, that it just feels like a lazy Talk This mashup. Like, this would be like if we had, like, an episode that was, like, Mario and Final Fantasy. We'd be like, haha, Mario RPG. And then we'd be like, no, that's too boring.
But no, it was Shigeru Miyamoto was like, yeah, let's do an RPG with Mario. And Square was like, we really want a game that the West will like for once. And thereby was born Super Mario RPG.
Yeah, I really loved the way that Wikipedia put this. Specifically, Super Mario RPG came out of Miyamoto's desire to make an RPG game using Mario. It's like, yeah. He sure succeeded.
He sure did.
I just thought that was funny. Like, it wasn't like a desire. They don't phrase it as a desire for anything specific. It's just like, he wanted a Mario RPG, and that is what this game is.
It sure is. Definitely is.
Anyway, so basically what you're telling me here is that Mario is a Square character.
Yeah.
Shocking implications for that.
Well, especially with they just announced that they're doing a remake, which everyone was surprised by because, they have got Square back on board, to do it. I guess, Square Enix now. So that relationship, refostering, working together again, only a matter of time.
Soundtrack here by Yoko Shimomura.
Yes.
It was actually really disconcerting for me. I watched the announcement trailer for the remake, and like the first half of it specifically, the second half's got horns and stuff. It sounds different. The first half sounds so disconcertingly like a Kingdom Hearts, like Disney World, so just like you're bopping around soundtrack.
Yeah, no, I was listening to some of the soundtrack, like the battle music, and I was like, this is a Kingdom Hearts minigame track.
Yeah.
You could play this over like Sora wandering around with Winnie the Pooh, knocking the bees out of the air, and it would fit.
It was just really like it was mental dissonance for me to watch Mario walking around to this music that is so obviously a different series. But it's a Square Mario RPG, so it's not obviously a different series. It's just weird for me personally.
Yeah. Now, this was one of her earlier projects at Square. I think just preceded by like Live Alive. She wanted to do more classical style music as opposed to Street Fighter. So
what says classical? Like Mario and a possessed doll and Bowser.
She would, we'll get to this later, but of the two spiritual successors to Super Mario RPG, she would continue to do the music for the Mario and Luigi series. So.
Well, in any event, if you aren't familiar with Super Mario RPG, it is basically what it sounds like. The name is right there on the tin.
It sure is.
But Mario and his pals, Mario is doing as Mario does. He's trying to rescue Peach, who the Wikipedia page, confusing to me, refers to as Princess Toadstool the entire time. So I'm like,
I think that was her name then.
Like, sure, but it was confusing to me. Don't confuse me.
Okay.
Apparently her name is Princess Peach Toadstool. Shows you how much I know about the Mario lore.
True.
Does that mean that Toad is her uncle? Probably.
Well, she does, all the toads do live in her kingdom.
A lot of questions about Mario lore here that I'm sure someone who knew anything about this series beyond Mario Go Jump would be able to answer. Anyway, Mario is trying to rescue Princess Toadstool, aka Peach, from Bowser, because that's what Mario does. But then this guy named Smithy, who is apparently, to quote Wikipedia, a notorious blacksmith from another dimension, which, like, LOL. Love the... What does it take to be a notorious blacksmith? I guess building a robot army like Smithy, but, a bold phrase. But Smithy kind of invades their world along with a giant talking sword named Exor. And in doing that, it destroys the star road and breaks it up into 7 like individual stars that scatter throughout the land. And that's bad because the star road helps grant people's wishes, obviously. And so once that happens, the whole kind of Mario gang gets split up, and gradually you kind of put together your party and gather the stars, and eventually, spoiler alert, defeat Smithy, destroy Exor. All is well with the world again. Not quite enough killing God here for my taste. Feels blacksmith. It's not quite hit God.
I did think it was really funny. One of the retrospective videos I was watching pointed this out. And in a lot of interviews, they were like, and at Square where we were like, oh, RPG, you need to have weapons, equipping weapons, doing stuff. But we were like, oh, that doesn't really fit Mario. And Nintendo was like, you can't give Mario a sword. And it turned the villain of Super Mario RPG is someone attempting to introduce like swords and stuff to the Mario universe. You can't do that. Miyamoto was apparently like, no, you have to have a hammer though.
Yeah. That's a tool.
Which the director, what is his name?
I have him written down here. The director's name is Chihiro Fujioka.
Yes, Fujioka was like, I think getting hit with a hammer is worse than getting hit with a sword, but that's just me.
That's true, but hammers already exist in the Mario lore, right? There's the Koopas who throw the hammers. So it's all about consistency. Respect, Miyamoto. Respect.
Exactly.
Speaking of, another I just love some of these matter-of-fact quotes from the development summary in the Wikipedia overview. Oh, where is this? It was they got a 60% demo of the game. Yes. It says, when Nintendo of America received a 60% complete version in November, The staff was surprised at the inclusion of an RPG battle system. Which, huh?
They didn't, Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan did not have very good communication back then, is sort of my impression from having talked about this era for a bit.
Like, sure. But again, what's the title of this game?
They might not have titled it by that point.
I guess so.
They never titled it, honestly, it seems like.
Legend of the Seven Stars is a solid subtitle.
You're right. I also liked that, they're trying to bring the Mario elements into their RPG systems. And one of the things that, I think it was Fujioka again, was talking about, one of the things they wanted to include but ended up not, was the fact that Mario could grow or shrink in size. But it apparently just looked really not correct for a big Mario to be walking around on the isometric maps that they did.
Uh-huh.
And so they had to cut it, which apparently he was sad about because they wanted to have little tiny dungeons for little tiny Mario.
That feels worth mourning, I'm not gonna lie. This idea, though, does speak to something that was sort of like very acclaimed about the game, which was its humor, which raises the question of, is Super Mario RPG mad funny?
It did, it had the Ted Woodsley, the guy who did all of Square's translations back then, that are varying degrees of faithful and liked. I think because it was Nintendo, he had a little bit more support and oversight in this translation as opposed to his Final Fantasy ones. But there are, some differences between the original Japanese release and how things were translated here.
Anyway, people thought it was funny, and how could it not be funny? You're running around with, like, a Cloud Boy and Bowser.
Who's the Cloud Boy, a literal cloud.
Literal Cloud Boy.
Yes,
not
I felt like
Cloud.
I should clarify.
I said that, and I didn't even realize what I was saying. But you do wonder if designing Mallow, they were like, Cloud.
A cloud.
Interesting idea. Little known inspiration.
Got a name for your funny little guy yet? Nomura over there in character design?
Nomura being like, I'm just gonna take a little stroll around. What's everybody else working on?
Clouds? Perfect.
Done. But it is pretty much, I mean, like I've said over and over, pretty much is what's on the tin. It's an isometric 3D platformer, right? Like, it's Mario of the era, but it's also got turn-based battles.
Yeah, one thing that is different from the way that Final Fantasy plays is Super Mario RPG, and I think this would be carried on in Mario and Luigi and Paper Mario, has like action QuickTime event presses that you do during attacks to make them work better, essentially. Yeah. So you hit your attack and then you have to hit another button with timing or whatever in order to have it happen. And they talked about wanting it to be a little bit more action-y as opposed to keep the player engaged in it, because they were taking like a platformer and putting it in a much slower game genre. So making sure that they were having to pay attention and continue to press buttons was a priority for them.
And people, I feel like unsurprisingly, I feel like saying it's Mario and it's an RPG feels like an obvious slam dunk. Maybe not.
It wasn't. I mean, RPGs were not that popular over in the West at this time.
Yeah. It did sell surprisingly well in America, is what they said. And it never came to Europe. They were like, we're not doing this. But it sold, and I thought this was funny, it rented really well. It sold really well, and it was the top rented game for like 5 months. Which, man, that's a stat you don't see anymore.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, if you're Nintendo, maybe you're pissed about that, right? Maybe you actually don't want to see it rent too well.
I wonder, I mean, they must still get a share from renting, surely.
You think so? It's not just like a library?
You have to pay to rent it.
Right,
from,
but like you'd
Blockbuster.
You pay Blockbuster to rent it, not Nintendo.
I wonder how that worked, actually. Do you think that, like, Blockbuster had to pay, like
a royalty?
how streaming theoretically works, where you pay based on how many players that thing is getting on the game that you're renting out? Or do you think they just had to buy copies of the game and then they could rent it out as much as they want? Because that doesn't seem...
You're right.
That seems like a library.
You're right.
Like you shouldn't be able to charge for it.
That seems like a bad deal for Nintendo. On the flip side of things, I'm trying to imagine, like, the little video store at the shopping center by the Safeway that we used to go to, having to keep, like, detailed royalty reports for every game publisher and sending, like, a monthly check to Nintendo.
Well, I don't know how it worked for movies either, to be honest, you know?
I think it's gotta be you buy a copy and that's it, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I
have no idea.
I just don't feel like it could be like, hey, you pimply 16-year-old working the counter at Blockbuster. It's your job to make sure we fulfill our contractual obligation to Nintendo by tracking exactly how many pimply 14-year-olds rent Super Mario RPG.
Do you not think they didn't track how many times something got rented out?
I guess they had to
because you have to have that figure.
There's this data I'm just talking about where they had to track it, but I can't imagine it being like I have to send a nickel to Nintendo every time it gets rented.
That's a side quest topic for you. That could be our side quest next week. How did Blockbuster work?
How did Blockbuster work? We're really dating ourselves here. Like, I'm sure there are people listening to this being like, you're so stupid. Like, of course it worked this particular way. How old are you?
Hey, we know that it existed, okay? So we're not that young.
We really did. We rented games. We went back to Blockbuster like multiple times in a day to rent different discs of TV seasons, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're legit. We're ancient.
We're old.
But we did not play Super Mario RPG.
No, we did not. Well, one, it was before... Well, to really date myself, it was before I was born.
Yeah.
But we were just not a Nintendo childhood family.
I know. Despite having a Wii, we really did not have...
Our Wii was our first thing, as was a lot of people's, actually, first Nintendo console.
Right, but the Wii for us was a fitness machine, as we've talked about.
As it was for a lot of people. Yep. We played a lot of Wii Sports, too.
That's a fitness game.
Yeah, that's all people played on the Wii. It's the Wii Sports.
Anyway, Super Mario RPG has become somewhat hard to play over the past decade or so. It was one of the last games released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Then it came out for the Wii Virtual Console. I think it may have been on the Wii U Virtual Console as well, but nobody had a Wii U. And then it's one of the games packaged with the, like, novelty SNES Classic that you can buy. But it has not, and now it makes sense, I guess, right? Although the Switch is ancient, so you can't say now it makes sense. The Switch has been out for years. But now it makes sense why they never released a Switch version, because they were planning to squeeze you for all of your $60 worth for the remake.
Maybe even $70. We'll see.
It's up for pre-sale. I think it was just $60, but I could be wrong.
Zelda was up for $60 for a while.
You're right. Add on a little extra fee.
But it being one of the, the bigger SNES games, it's one of the few that use the Nintendo SA1 chip on their cartridge. Which is fun. Just an additional microprocessor, basically. But they had to have a fancier little thing. Apparently, and one thing they said they sold this for $75 back then. So
the remake is
there's
a bargain.
Your gaming price. It's a bargain.
I saw some complaints, namely from The Gamer. I liked this headline that the remake, quote, has no drip.
They kept the little stubbiness of the original character designs, though.
I think it's a similar... Overall, there was a lot of really positive reaction to the cleaned up new 3D. I mean, it was 3D before, but like the new models of it all. But I did see what the article was getting at, that, you know, in a similar way as the like Shadow of the Colossus remake or something like that, you lose some of the necessary like mood of some of it in the style.
Yeah.
Like, I got it. I understood what they were getting at.
That's fair. I just like how little and like you could like squish him. You know, you could put Mario in between your fingers and you'd go wahoo wahoo wahoo.
Feels like a game they could make with like a peripheral. A little like de-stress game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might be wondering, well, Super Mario RPG sold really well and people really liked it. It didn't quite crack the Wikipedia greatest games of all time list, but in reading about it, it's on a bunch of like greatest Nintendo games of all time lists. You might be wondering, where's the sequel? What happened to the sequel? This is an era where a sequel should have gotten cranked out in the next 6 months. And indeed, there was a sequel announced in 1997. But, like Emma said, Square heard the siren song of discs.
Yeah.
And that led to some changes.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty soon after this release, Square had moved on to their Final Fantasy VII discs on the PlayStation. And so Nintendo started work on what was originally called Super Mario RPG 2 with Intelligent Systems, who we know for Fire Emblem, but also make the Paper Mario series, which is what they ended up changing the title to avoid any issues with Square, basically, because Square actually owns a lot of the stuff for Super Mario RPG. Not Mario, obviously, but a lot of like the name and
who knows? Read those contracts really carefully.
A lot of like the name and the stuff surrounding it, so they ended up changing it into Paper Mario. And then Chihiro Fujioka, who was the director, had left Square to make a new company, and he ended up working with Nintendo to make the Mario and Luigi series, which also, as I mentioned, featured a score by Yoko Shimomura. So that's sort of like the original name sort of went into Paper Mario, and some of the original team went into the Mario and Luigi series, but there was no proper sequel to Super Mario RPG.
Although the director has said that he wishes he could make one. He wants to make one and then retire. But he's also apparently didn't know anything about the remake. So
yeah.
Seems a little unlikely.
Yeah.
But let Mario fight. Give Mario a sword. Or a keyblade. Hint, hint.
The day I see Mario holding a keyblade is the day that I just perish, I think.
He doesn't have one. He doesn't have one in that Smash reveal trailer. I can't remember.
He absolutely should. But no.
Alas. Imagine if this remake that they're making looks pretty faithful, but can you imagine if they've hidden it and it's really like a Final Fantasy VII remake kind of energy?
I don't think Nintendo would let that happen, unfortunately.
Miyamoto just hates storytelling. Anyway, speaking of stories, I guess. Yeah?
Yeah.
That brings us to Season, A Letter to the Future, which came out in January of this year from the Canadian Scavengers Studio, the troubled Canadian studio, Scavengers Studio, for the PlayStations and PC.
Yes, it was announced at like God, when did the PS5 come out? I feel like it was announced at like an early PS5 like feature showcase.
I think it was the Game Awards, I think is what I read.
Oh, maybe it was
Game
the Game
Awards.
Awards. The Keeley-verse. It turns to Jello in my head eventually.
He owns the whole industry. What is his job?
Hype man, basically.
Does he have a job? I thought he had a job.
He was a journalist originally. I don't think he can in good conscience call himself that now, but yeah, because I remember it being announced and it's like, oh, that's so cool, and then it sort of just like disappeared for a while because the studio was going through some stuff. And then it finally released, and now the studio continues to go through some stuff.
Yeah, let's knock out all the studio stuff right here and right now. Get that out of the way. So Scavenger Studio, Canadian indie, based in Montreal. The Before season, which is like a chill exploration game for the most part. Made a game called Darwin Project, which was like a Canadian battle royale, basically, which is a hilarious.
I'm glad that you specified Canadian there.
It's set in Canada.
Important part of the genre.
I thought it was funny. That game like totally fizzled. They like put it into like actual release in 2020, and then 4 months later they were like, we out. So it was not super successful. And then sort of shortly after that, it came out that it was, to put it mildly, a bit of a toxic working environment because of the co-founders. In reading this game industry biz expose about it, it just like kept getting worse and worse. Like, I kept thinking like, oh, like it's just everything that when you think of a toxic gaming company environment, it's like all of that, but to a like almost comical degree. Like, there's an anecdote about them presenting an idea that a character in one of their games would be able to play guitar, and then someone said that wasn't realistic because guitar was too complicated for a woman, and like that just like nobody said anything.
Yeah, I every time you read these, there's one of those where you're just like, I can't believe people say that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not fair, though. He hadn't played The Last of Us Part 2 and realized that women can play guitar.
That's actually, fun fact, the first time a woman was ever documented.
Playing guitar. Yeah. No, that comment is just so ridiculous. It's hard not to laugh at, but it really was like a persistent, toxic work environment. Particularly former creative director Simon Darvaux, previously at Ubisoft, so that's nice. Was always causing a lot of trouble, making things hard for the women that worked there, making it into a huge boys club, and apparently dating at the time the CEO, or for some time dating the CEO, Amélie Lamarche, which meant that it was hard for anybody to file reports about him because
she was basically the head of HR too.
Yeah. They, took some cursory steps, like they instituted some ways to report things that didn't involve either of them, which, without commenting on why, it would be a problem to involve either of them. They did have like an external agency do an investigation where the CEO temporarily stepped down. She is still CEO. She ended up going back after the internal investigation. Darvaux was like demoted to a position of his choosing, and I think then shortly after just left the company entirely. But it does not seem like they were able to, despite him leaving, it does not really seem like they made a huge effort to meaningfully address their criticisms and the company culture.
Yeah, it's just like an absolutely putrid mix of like toxic masculinity and harassment and like girl boss horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds like a rough place to live. And by live, I mean work. But I say live because it was like there was stuff was like he was like living in the office. Yeah. To a lot of just like tiny little like that's effed up anecdotes, and then like the usual like everybody's drunk and groping people stuff. So all of that.
Every time I'm like, the companies have parties where we all drink. Why do people do that? Don't do that with your coworkers.
It's also just like we do that after our big shows at work. You know, it's like an after party for the VIPs. And it's like, man, that's the time when you try to make sure the big money people are having a good time. That's not the time that you grope everybody around you. Understand what these parties are for, people. They're not for fun.
I don't really think, like, a lot of these aren't, like, you know,
no, I know. They're just, like,
parties.
drinking
They're
in the
just,
office,
like,
which is weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway. All of this, and the Canadian Battle Royale independently, frankly, sit at, like, extreme odds with the general feel and vibe of this game. It was so shocking to me. Like, I started playing this before I did any research on it, because I was behind, and I was like, oh, Super Mario RPG is gonna have a remake, but not till November.
Yeah.
So I played some of this, and then reading about it, I was like, oh my god, like, the content of this game completely obscures the fact that there was, like, horror happening behind it. You would not guess that at all from what this game is about, and the art style, and the main character, or any of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important example of, we're always talking, you know, in a lot of the exposés, they're always about AAA companies, either with crunch or harassment or unsafe working environments in some other way. But indies are not immune from that kind of BS at all. In fact, sometimes they are more susceptible to it, because a lot of times it's like there's a founder, you know, and sometimes that founder is someone who sucks. Or sometimes the early employees are a bunch of, like, bro friends who suck, and then when they start expanding, they don't know how to deal with it, and you end up coming into an awful environment. And that's absolutely something that can happen in the indie space, no matter how, like, games may try to present themselves as, like, cozy, wholesome experiences.
And this game is absolutely a cozy, mostly wholesome, unless you're the Kotaku reviewer who really hated it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I read a lot of mixed stuff on it, but yeah, the Kotaku reviewer, John Williams, really hated it.
Which I felt having played, like, some of the opening of this game, like, I can definitely see how some of those criticisms are gonna be valid. But it was still like, oh my god, like, this is a short little indie game. Like,
well, before we get into it, do you want to give a bit of a summary of what Season is?
Yeah. I've talked all about all this toxic company culture, and you're all like, ooh, what's it going to be about? In Season, you play as a young woman whose name is apparently Estelle, although that is not something that I have picked up on playing the opening, like, hour or so here. Who is getting ready to leave her village, which, like, never happens. People don't leave this village because your friend named Pate, which is, like, so funny. What a weird name to pick for your friend. I love that your friend's name is Pate, and he's this like just like a weird looking little boy. Anyway, he's had a vision that the season, which is sort of like what this world calls sort of certain eras, I guess, is going to come to an end. And so you make, like, a little special pendant that absorbs some of your mother's memories, and then you take your bike and you go out on a mission to kind of document the end of the season by taking photos and audio recordings and putting them into a scrapbook before it ends.
Reading about this, it reminded me a lot of Sable. In its, like, just its opening concept. Like, the scrapbooking is a different element of that. You were actually going around and trying to document and curate your experience, which, very cool concept, no matter whether it works in execution or not, based on various reviewers. But I think that's a super cool concept. But in Sable, it's like, oh, you know, you're assembling your bike, and then you're heading out to, like, explore the world and find your place in it. So in that way, I feel like that if I were to play it, I would be like, oh, this is like Sable, but maybe not quite as well defined.
I will say, and this is going to have big, like, man who has read one book energy, so forgive me. But I just today finished a reread of Life of Pi, because a friend of mine was in the Broadway show, and I sort of meant to read it before I saw it, but I didn't, so I was rereading it after, because I really liked it in high school, and I figured out why, because it's, like, very 16-year-old Madeline core in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Madeline core.
Like, the author, like, creating, like, a fake intro, like, excellent. Storytelling, all about, like, the power of stories and myth making. Heck yeah, eat that up. But anyway, like, some of the kind of, like, melancholic loneliness and, like, exploration of this game had sort of similar energy to some of the, like, some parts of that book or that story. Anyway. Also, great timing for me for a game about, like, leaving someone behind forever.
Yeah. Or if, for a couple years.
Or for a couple years.
Where you'll see them every once in a while,
Sorry. Yeah.
You really were introducing something maudlin there. And, like, I get it, Madeline, but...
No, I know. I didn't mean to compare it directly to my experience. I was just like, the, like, melancholic goodbye. I was like, oh, here we are. Fortunately, Clickly Boyfriend didn't have to sacrifice any of his memories forever to protect me.
To protect you?
Yeah.
Just his frozen cookies.
Just his frozen cookies, indeed. Just the person who makes the good pie crust in the house. Just the person who can make the grocery lists.
I am pretty drawn. Like, I don't know. I read these reviews and I was like, oh, I don't know. But I love a good vehicle.
Yeah.
She bikes around on her bike. I love that.
A lot of complaints about the bike, though. Gotta say. Yeah. I haven't really encountered that so far, but the reviews have me a little worried.
Well, hopefully your bike remains safe.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of the scrapbooking thing, right? If you're going around, and the idea of, like, these sort of open world games or small open world games as you're seeing different things and having different experiences, and then you were literally taking those and, like, putting them in your order of what you found important and what you want to look like when you're done. Very good. I very much like that concept. But I was worried about some of the critiques of, like, the writing itself. Unfortunately.
I have personally found it fine so far. Granted, I'm only, like, maybe a little over an hour into, like, a 6 or 7 hour game here. So I can definitely see how it might get grating or get, I don't know, sort of overly vacuous. A lot of the complaints about this game in reviews are that, like, it's pretending that it's saying something important about memory or grief or just, like, existence, but instead it's just giving you a lot of, like, you think it's profound kind of stuff, which in some ways, like, is probably character appropriate, right, for a 20-year-old who has never been outside of her village, like, writing kind of, like, bad, moody one-line poems. Feels like appropriate for that, but also might not be the most satisfying player narrative experience. But I think it's really going to vary, right? On one hand, you've got the Polygon reviewer who was like, this is one of the best games I've played in years, so moving, so meaningful. And on the other hand, you've got the Kotaku reviewer who's like, this is colonial BS, and terrible. So it's really going to be your mileage may vary, literally, on your bike kind of game. I'm enjoying the scrapbooking too. I think the scrapbooking is definitely one of, like, the strongest, most unique elements of it. Although I will say, and this will surprise no one about me, but it does stress me out just a little bit. Not the, like, sort of the actual scrapbooking. I don't love that it, like, pans over your scrapbook. So, like, the way the game works, right, is you can, like, take photos and audio recordings. And if you want to cheese through the game, you can just take photos of whatever you want and slap them on the page and just keep going, right? But the point is that you'll get sort of invested enough in thinking about what you want in there and taking interesting photos. And there are certain places where, there's plenty of things you can take photos of or audio recordings of that are just photos or audio recordings. But sometimes you find things and your character comments on them, right? And you get like a special little line of text that you can write into the journal, all that good stuff, right? And then once you put like 5 of them on the page, you get a little bit like your character has some thoughts about it and you get access to some more decorations. But at that point, it like pans over the page. And for me, often, because I'm anticipating that I'm going to put other things on the page, it's like, oh, look at this like boring, like 1/4 filled 2-page spread that's waiting for me to find something a little bit more interesting to put in it. So I wish you could like say like choose, like maybe it unlocks after 5, but I wish you could choose when you got the little like revelation thing, because I found it a little bit like, yeah, I'm not done yet though, so let's not do the glamour shot.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
The one thing I was sympathetic to in the Kotaku review, I don't mean to be knocking the Kotaku review. I thought it was totally coherent and made a lot of sense, and I've not really played enough of the game to determine exactly where I fall on this love it or hate it scale. But they did have a critique that like the narrator comments that sometimes happen, apart from them being, potentially sort of banal, right, is that it turns it from being kind of a vibe and a personal experience into something that feels a little more like a collectathon, right? Like you're trying to hit the right things. And for my little completionist heart, that is definitely something like an impulse that I'm having to manage.
Yeah. I read that in the PC Gamer review too, is they really did not like the narrator being there. Which I sort of get in terms of like, this game doesn't really make much sense to have a narrator just off first impressions for me. Because it feels like it's supposed to be something that's more introspective, and if you have a narrator that's spelling things out for you, that seems a little bit counterintuitive.
It's tough, right? Because I think you could I think maybe some of the root of some of the critiques of this game is that it kind of tries to walk down the middle, right? On one hand, something that people were very excited about this game, and I think rightly so, is that we have this, this young black woman who is the main character of the game, who has, just seems like a person, right? And so, like, that's exciting. And by creating this sort of, like, 4 games, anyway, specific and unusual character, right? You might think, oh, okay, you want that character to have a perspective and to have a story to tell. But on the other hand, this is a game that's sort of, like, inviting a pretty... I don't know, this might be overselling it, but a deeply personal engagement with the environment here and deciding what you, the player, feels is important. And so, like, on that side, you might want to get rid of the narrator. Like, I think the opening segment with your mom, where you're kind of going around and selecting objects for their smell or their feel, and she's going to lose a memory as a result of that. That I was like, like this is a really specific like character moment. Even if some of these memories aren't like, no, I mean they were pretty specific. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like this was really touching. Like I got to think about when the mom didn't want to lose a specific memory, like what do I do? Right? And then I think that sort of specificity that's there in that first 30 minutes, I'm getting the sense is maybe going to fade away a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough. They kind of tried to have it both ways, I think.
Well, it seems like it was not successful for them, apparently.
No.
And just recently, like a couple months ago, they downsized their staff from around 40 to 16. But they were very specific. They said it sold 60,000 copies. Which, is probably not enough to sustain a crew of 40 if this is, like, your one project. And, the CEO, who is the same CEO who had all the problems, but they did say, we're trying to offer as much support as we can to the laid-off employees, which is good. Better than just cutting them off, I guess. And it is unfortunate that it turned out this way.
It's interesting. It feels like a game that was a little behind its time. Like, can you imagine if this game came out in like late spring 2020? It's been a smash. This game that's sort of about grief and isolation and the end of an era and like biking around outside. If it had hit in like May 2020, this game...
It might have if it hadn't had such an awful workplace environment.
Seriously.
Thing, too. That's why... Well, that's not why you treat your employees well.
Just in case there's a global pandemic where your game about being outdoors and feeling a little sad and lonely.
It needs to come out.
Yeah.
Oh man, every time we talk about a game like this though, where there's like photos and stuff, I'm like, when will a game steal Final Fantasy 15's photo mechanic? It pops into the back of my head every time. That nobody's stolen it yet. Steal it. Steal it.
Couldn't do it here. Who would take the photos? Your bike?
I know you couldn't do it here. It just, every time we talk about a game where you're like taking photos and stuff, I just have to say it out loud into the ether so that somebody picks it up. You know?
Speaking of trendy mechanics, or not so trendy mechanics, there is a point in the early game where you can pet the goats. And this was a character moment I liked, because she was like, I've never petted it for like an animal before. It's my first time petting an animal. And then she pets the second one, and she's like, I don't feel like that went as well. Like, I must have had beginner's luck. And then she pets another one, and she's like, okay, I got it. I can pet four-legged animals. And I was like, that's funny. Like, that's a little character there.
Yeah.
And so then maybe what we're meant to think is like, okay, this is a character who writes kind of like dumb stuff into her journal. That seems fair to me.
It's fair.
It's just unfortunate, maybe. Maybe unfortunate. I don't know. Potentially unfortunate that it gets like played up to be something a little bigger than that because she's like documenting the end of an epoch.
I think maybe more of the problem is it for the reviewers is maybe this is sort of how all the characters talk a little bit. Which it's one thing if it's a character choice, it's another thing if it's just your writing style, I guess.
Yeah.
You just got the demo, right? Did it entice you?
No, there's no demo on the PlayStation.
Oh, I thought you said you got the demo.
I would have loved to get the demo, but there's only a demo on Steam as far as I can tell, and only for PC.
Well.
I'll probably stick with it. It's not that long. The triggers are sure haptic. Or adaptive, I guess. It's adaptive triggers. It's not haptic triggers.
Haptic triggers and adaptive feedback, you know?
So right. So true.
Well, shall we do a mashup?
Mario on a bike is pretty good.
I mean, he has been on a bike before.
When?
There's Mario sports games.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a Mario cycling thing. Mario goes to the Olympics and rides a bike.
That's true.
Whatever.
But like a Mario game where you're Mario and you're just like taking photos of the Mushroom King, like Mario Odyssey, but like a photo game.
I see, yeah. Pokemon Mario Snap.
Mario Snap would hit.
I don't know if there's enough Mario creatures to really do a Mario Snap. You'd at least have to change what you were doing a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. But I feel like a Mario photo game could be strong.
Yeah, find the hidden Luigi.
Find the hidden Luigi.
What's Luigi doing?
No, I think people would like that, and it would feel like a good Mario spin-off. I'm not sure if there's really... Like, is there a way to go, like, a Mario photo game? Like, that's gotta be, yeah, like, you're on a bike taking photos. I don't know, I'm trying to think of, like, what would, like, a melancholy Mario game feel like?
Yeah, it's sort of hard to say. I mean, I know I have limited experience with Mario, so if there is a melancholy Mario game, you know, let us know.
Yeah.
Like, or even, like, a melancholy Mario segment. Even.
Someplace where Mario... You know? I feel like, I mean, to do this, you would have to really, literally kill Luigi, I think.
No, you can't kill Luigi. No, you just the Mushroom Kingdom is ending. You know, the magic is being sucked out of it, and they're moving it to a new planet.
I do feel like that's the plot of more or less every Mario game, and they do solve it at the end.
But it's like Mario Galaxy, like, sort of, you know, like, they're moving it, you know? Like, it can't sustain on this planet anymore. So they have to move everything to another planet, and you, like, go through the history of the Mushroom Kingdom as you move stuff from one planet to the other. And then you have a whole, like, Ship of Theseus situation.
I think I just fell asleep. Sorry.
And also you jump on Goombas.
It could be like Bowser, you know, meditating on where his life went wrong.
He does that every game.
Or like Bowser Jr. thinking about his terrible dad.
That's not quite the right vibes.
You're right.
From Season. It's not just like everybody's sad.
You're right.
In fact, they're not very sad in Season.
That's
That's
true.
one thing I noticed. Is they're sort of chill about the world ending, to be honest.
All right, let me go in a different direction then, because Melancholy Mario, Miyamoto is going to shut that stuff down.
That's not Mario.
What?
Mario's not sad.
No, Mario does not feel despair or existential dread.
That's true.
Mario is sure.
They made the Barbie movie.
You're right. Mario teaches feminism.
I think that they should get back on the next Mario movie and should be about existential dread Mario.
Or
That's what they want. That's what the people want.
it would have to be about like everybody likes Luigi better than Mario now, and he like doubts his place in the universe.
You really could just do like a rehash of Barbie, like without the feminism, where it's Mario and Luigi.
I don't really know what happens in the Barbie movie.
Oh, well, I guess I won't get into spoilers, but putting Mario and Luigi in place of Barbie and Ken, essentially.
Sure. Luigi becomes a toxic man. Luigi's like, oh man, what's the equivalent of my job? Just mushroom.
Just mushroom. No, he's a ghost hunter. Come
Is
on.
he a plumber?
No, he's a ghost hunter.
My job, just ghost. Like what would a photography RPG look like?
Man, I don't know. Fatal Frame isn't an RPG.
Yeah,
but
you're
you
right.
Can make
I was like, I knew there was a
photography
game.
action
I couldn't think of what it was. Fatal Frame is the closest. All right, I'm gonna keep marinating on...
You could do something with like Mario going into pictures.
Doesn't that happen in Luigi's Mansion?
It's like maybe like
No,
yeah, that
doesn't
feels like a
happen in
familiar
Super
thing.
Mario 64? I don't know.
I don't know, but like you discover like an old room, you know, and there's like some secrets there, and Mario gets pulled into all the notes and pictures in there, and you end up like exploring this world, but through the records that were left behind. I know that when I say it out loud, you're falling asleep, but like it would be like gameplay. It's just like an introduction to whatever world that you're introducing.
Yeah,
like the way they have the big sword in Super Mario RPG. It's like something like that.
I do hate to say this though, that in Super Mario 64, Mario does jump into paintings.
Yes, Malin, that's a common mechanic in games. It's not paintings though. It's like it's like stuff. It's like recoded. To bring it back to another Square property.
Great, developed by Square Enix. Excellent, I'm sold. Mario but recoded. You got it. Done. Everybody loves recoded.
It's a cool concept, okay? Just because it didn't work great doesn't mean it's not a cool concept.
Alright, final pitch. It's Kingdom Hearts 4 with a Mushroom Kingdom world, and there's a photo mode.
No.
You can bring the skateboard back. That's basically a bike.
Not good enough.
Ah, well. Listeners, do you hunger for a melancholic Mario? Can you believe that women know how to play the guitar? Does 60,000 copies feel like not a lot to you, or a lot? Do you crave more scrapbooking in your game. I feel like that could be next. I feel like photo mode kind of passe. Everybody's got that now. Scrapbooking feels like the next frontier of photo mode. Do you wish for a game in which Mario, more literally than in this game, kills God? If you have thoughts about any of these questions or anything else that we talked about on this episode, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, the artist formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, where Emma's going to pull our next 2 games in just a minute, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. Clickbait Boyfriend reminded me this week that I apparently said in our year-end podcast of 2022 that I would be writing more blogs for the Talk This blog in 2023. So
I've not happened.
Like 4.5 more months to make good on that. So who knows? Maybe soon. But finally, and most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today. Subscribe to Talk This so you never miss an episode on Sundays. Next week is my podcast, which I have, not really put any thought into. I mean, apparently we're doing it about Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Or if you're looking at Emma's blog post from this past week, we're doing it about the hit Hugh Grant, Drew Barrymore film, Music and Lyrics.
The people need to know what was important about that episode.
I feel like Music and Lyrics could have had a great licensed game.
Yeah.
But alas. Well, I don't know. Maybe it did. Who knows? Anyway, put Hugh Grant into more games. But Emma, what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks at the end of August?
In 2 weeks, we are going to be talking about Wild Arms and Fear and Hunger 2, which I wrote on the site as Fear and Hunter, but Fear and Hunger.
Can't wait to talk about Fear and Hunger. Also, it's not the end of August in 2 weeks. It's the beginning of September. Jeez. So look forward to that. And then another side quest, and then another games, and then a 6-week episode, and then onward and onward in the cycle forever.
Forever.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a sign-off?
This week, I hope that this very hot, very rainy season will go away already.